In a large, bustling city where skyscrapers pierced the clouds and streets buzzed with life, there lived a man named Marcus Williams. He was no ordinary citizen. He was the police chief of the city's largest precinct. Known for his sharp mind, fearless leadership, and unwavering dedication to justice, Marcus had earned respect from many who worked under him and from the people he served. However, not everyone shared this admiration. Some members of his own department resented him, not because of his abilities or decisions, but because of the color of his skin. They whispered behind closed doors, calling him names and spreading false rumors that he only got his position to meet diversity quotas. Marcus heard these whispers often, but never let them affect him outwardly. He believed in leading by example and staying above pettiness. But one evening, something happened that made him realize how deep the rot of prejudice ran within his department. As he walked through the station after a long day, he overheard two officers talking in hushed tones near the break room. Their conversation sent chills down his spine. "You know," one of them said, "we should clean up those neighborhoods where all the junkies live. It's not like anyone important stays there anyway." The other laughed cruelly, adding, "Yeah, maybe if we focused on locking up the right people who don't belong, we'd actually make progress." The words stung Marcus deeply. By the right people, they clearly meant individuals based on their race or socioeconomic status. This wasn't just casual ignorance, it was systemic racism disguised as law enforcement strategy. If such attitudes persisted unchecked, innocent lives could be ruined, and the trust between the community and the police would crumble completely. That night, as Marcus sat alone in his office staring at the dim glow of his desk lamp, an idea began to take shape in his mind, an idea so bold and risky that it could either save his department or destroy it entirely. Marcus decided to go undercover. Not as another officer or investigator, but as someone entirely different, a homeless man. He wanted to see firsthand how far the prejudice extended beyond whispered conversations in the station. Would officers treat a homeless person differently? Would they ignore calls for help? Or worse, would they abuse their power without fear of consequences? These questions haunted him, and he knew the only way to find answers was to step into the shoes of those most vulnerable, the very people he had sworn to protect. Preparing for the role required careful planning. Marcus started by growing out his beard and cutting his hair unevenly to alter his appearance. He traded his crisp suits for tattered clothes scavenged from secondhand stores. His shiny badge and polished boots were replaced with worn-out sneakers and a patched-up jacket. To complete the transformation, he stopped shaving and allowed dirt to accumulate on his face and hands. Looking at himself in the mirror, Marcus barely recognized the man staring back at him. Gone was the confident police chief. In his place stood a gaunt, weathered figure who blended seamlessly into the shadows of the city. On the first day of his new life, Marcus ventured into the heart of downtown, where rows of makeshift tents lined the sidewalks. The air smelled of damp cardboard and stale food, and the sound of distant traffic mingled with the occasional shout or laugh from passers-by. At first, the experience was overwhelming. People avoided eye contact, hurrying past him as though he were invisible. Others tossed coins into his cupped hands without meeting his gaze, their pity evident but impersonal. Yet amidst the indifference, Marcus discovered moments of unexpected kindness. A young woman handed him a sandwich wrapped in paper, smiling softly before walking away. An elderly man sharing a park bench offered him half of his coffee, saying, "It gets cold out here. You'll need it more than I do." These small acts of humanity reminded Marcus why he joined the force in the first place, to serve and protect the vulnerable. But they also highlighted the stark contrast between compassion and cruelty. Late one afternoon, while sitting near a bus stop, Marcus watched as a patrol car pulled up beside him. Two officers stepped out, their faces stern and unapproachable. One of them approached him, demanding identification. When Marcus hesitated, explaining that he didn't carry any ID, the officer sneered. "Move along," the man barked. "We don't have time for your kind." The phrase struck Marcus like a punch to the gut. Your kind. He had heard similar words countless times throughout his career, but hearing them now, in this context, felt like a slap in the face. Despite the sting of rejection, Marcus refused to give up. Over the next few days, he continued observing interactions between officers and the homeless population. What he saw chilled him to the bone. In one instance, a group of teenagers vandalized a nearby store, and when Marcus tried to report the incident to a passing patrol car, the officer dismissed him with a wave of his hand. "Probably did it yourself," the man muttered before driving off. Another time, Marcus witnessed an officer kicking over a makeshift tent belonging to an elderly woman, scattering her belongings across the pavement. No explanation was given, no apology offered. Each encounter left Marcus feeling angrier and more determined to expose the truth. As weeks turned into months, Marcus grew accustomed to the hardships of street life. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, and sleep came fitfully on hard concrete benches. Yet he remained vigilant, documenting every interaction and jotting down notes whenever possible. He carried a small notebook hidden inside his jacket, scribbling details in shorthand to avoid drawing attention. Though physically exhausted, Marcus found solace in knowing that his efforts might lead to meaningful change. Still, there were nights when despair crept in, whispering doubts about whether anyone would believe him once he revealed his true identity. One particularly cold evening, as Marcus huddled under a thin blanket near a subway entrance, he met Sarah. She was a petite woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Unlike others who passed him by without a second glance, Sarah stopped to chat. "Mind if I sit here?" she asked, gesturing to the empty space beside him. Marcus nodded, grateful for the company. Over the next hour, they talked about everything, from the challenges of surviving on the streets to memories of happier times. Sarah revealed that she used to be a teacher until a medical emergency wiped out her savings, leaving her unable to pay rent. Her story resonated deeply with Marcus, reminding him of the fragility of life and how quickly fortunes could change. Their friendship blossomed quickly. Sarah became a source of strength and encouragement, often sharing what little food she had with Marcus. In return, he helped her navigate the complexities of street life, teaching her which shelters were safe and which areas to avoid. Together, they formed a bond rooted in mutual respect and understanding. One day, as they sat together sipping lukewarm soup from plastic cups, Sarah confided in Marcus about witnessing officers harassing other homeless individuals. "I've seen it happen too many times," she admitted, her voice trembling with anger. "They think we're less than human, like we don't matter." Sarah's words reinforced what Marcus already suspected, that the problem went far beyond individual cases of misconduct. It was systemic, ingrained in the culture of the department itself. Determined to gather concrete evidence, Marcus encouraged Sarah to share specific incidents involving officers whose names he recognized from his own precinct. With each detail she provided, Marcus felt a growing sense of urgency. The time had come to act. He couldn't remain silent any longer. Justice demanded accountability, and Marcus was prepared to deliver it, even if it meant risking everything he had worked so hard to achieve. Though still disguised as a homeless man, Marcus began laying the groundwork for his return to power. He carefully compiled the notes he had gathered, organizing them into a coherent timeline of events. Using a prepaid phone purchased under a fake name, he reached out to trusted allies within the department, officers who shared his vision of fairness and integrity. Together, they devised a plan to present the evidence in a way that would leave no room for denial or excuses. Marcus knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he also knew that silence was no longer an option. Change was coming, and he intended to lead the charge. Life on the streets was harsher than Marcus Williams had ever imagined. Each day brought new challenges, testing not just his physical endurance but also his emotional resilience. The city that once seemed vibrant and full of opportunity now appeared cold and indifferent. For Marcus, blending into this world meant learning to survive without the comforts he had taken for granted as a police chief. Every morning began with a struggle, finding food, staying warm, and avoiding trouble. Yet amidst the hardships, there were moments of humanity that reminded him why he had chosen this path. One of the hardest adjustments was dealing with hunger. Marcus quickly learned that meals weren't guaranteed. He scavenged through trash bins behind restaurants hoping to find discarded leftovers. Sometimes he struck gold, a half-eaten burger or a slightly bruised apple, but more often than not he went to bed with an empty stomach. The gnawing ache in his belly became a constant companion, a reminder of how fragile life could be when stripped of privilege. On particularly bad days, he envied those who had regular access to shelters where hot meals were served. But even then, lines stretched endlessly and patience wore thin as people jostled for their turn at the counter. Sleep was another battle. Without a proper bed, Marcus curled up wherever he could find shelter, from park benches to abandoned buildings. The ground was hard and unforgiving, leaving his body sore and stiff by morning. Rain made things worse, soaking through his thin jacket and chilling him to the bone. During one stormy night, he huddled under a bridge with other homeless individuals, sharing scraps of cardboard to stay dry. Despite the discomfort, Marcus noticed something remarkable: camaraderie. Strangers shared what little they had, a blanket, a cigarette, or even a joke, to lift each other's spirits. In those moments, Marcus realized that survival wasn't just about enduring hardship. It was about finding connection. Yet not all interactions were kind. Some encounters left scars deeper than any physical wound. One afternoon, while sitting near a busy intersection, Marcus watched as a patrol car slowed down beside him. Two officers stepped out, their expressions stern. "What are you doing here?" one of them demanded, towering over Marcus. When he explained that he was simply resting, the officer sneered. "This isn't your neighborhood," the man snapped. "Move along before I arrest you for loitering." Humiliated, Marcus gathered his few belongings and shuffled away, his heart pounding with anger and frustration. It wasn't the first time he'd been treated this way, nor would it be the last. These incidents weighed heavily on Marcus. As days turned into weeks, he began noticing patterns. Officers routinely ignored cries for help from homeless individuals, dismissing them as nuisances rather than human beings in need. Once, while walking past a group of teenagers harassing an elderly man, Marcus flagged down a passing patrol car. Instead of intervening, the officer rolled down the window and said, "Not our problem. Call social services if you care so much." The words stung, echoing the same apathy Marcus had seen countless times before. It became clear that some officers viewed the homeless population as invisible, less worthy of protection because of their circumstances. Despite these injustices, Marcus found solace in unexpected places. He formed friendships with others living on the streets, people whose stories inspired both admiration and sorrow. There was Jake, a former construction worker, who lost everything after a workplace injury left him unable to work, and Maria, a single mother fleeing domestic violence, clutching her young daughter's hand as they searched for safety. These conversations revealed layers of complexity behind homelessness, challenging stereotypes perpetuated by society, and sometimes by law enforcement itself. Among these acquaintances, Sarah stood out. A petite woman with kind eyes and a quiet strength, she became Marcus's closest ally during his time undercover. They met one chilly evening when Sarah stopped to share a sandwich she had saved from earlier in the day. "You look like you need this more than I do," she said with a warm smile. Grateful for the gesture, Marcus accepted, and the two struck up a conversation. Over the next few weeks, they grew closer, exchanging stories about their lives before ending up on the streets. Sarah's tale was heartbreaking yet inspiring. She had been a teacher until a medical emergency drained her savings, forcing her to leave her home and career behind. Her intelligence and compassion shone brightly, even in the darkest of times. Sarah proved invaluable to Marcus's mission. She confided in him about witnessing officers mistreating others in the area, describing specific incidents involving familiar names Marcus recognized from his own precinct. "I saw Officer Gray shove a man against a wall last week," she recounted one evening, her voice trembling with anger. "He called him names I can't repeat, all because the guy asked for directions to the nearest shelter." Another time, she described how a different officer kicked over a makeshift tent belonging to an elderly woman, scattering her belongings across the pavement. "They think we're nothing," Sarah whispered bitterly. "Like we don't matter." Each story fueled Marcus's determination to expose the truth. Armed with Sarah's first-hand accounts and his own observations, he meticulously documented every interaction in a small notebook hidden inside his jacket. Writing in shorthand to avoid suspicion, he recorded dates, times, locations, and descriptions of officers involved. Though physically exhausted, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. His sacrifices weren't in vain. They were building a case that could bring accountability to those abusing their power. But life on the streets wasn't just about gathering evidence. It was also about survival, and sometimes survival meant making difficult choices. One night, as Marcus huddled under a tarp with Sarah and a few others, a group of drunk men approached, demanding money. When no one responded, they grew aggressive, shoving Marcus and threatening violence. Instinctively, Marcus reached for the self-defense techniques drilled into him during his training. However, remembering his cover, he forced himself to back down, swallowing his pride and handing over the few coins he had collected that day. Watching the men walk away laughing, Marcus clenched his fists in silent fury. It was a stark reminder of how powerless he had become, but also of how important it was to stay committed to his mission. As weeks turned into months, Marcus grew increasingly adept at navigating street life. He learned which shelters were safe and which corners to avoid. He discovered tricks for staying warm during freezing nights and ways to stretch meager resources. Yet despite adapting to his surroundings, Marcus never lost sight of his ultimate goal: justice. Every insult, every shove, every act of neglect reinforced his resolve to confront the systemic issues plaguing his department. He knew that exposing the truth wouldn't be easy. It might even cost him his position, but he believed it was worth the risk. After all, real leadership wasn't about wielding power. It was about using it wisely to uplift others. By the time Marcus decided to end his undercover operation, he had transformed, not just physically but emotionally. The experience had humbled him, teaching lessons about empathy, resilience, and the true meaning of service. Though eager to return to his role as police chief, Marcus carried the weight of his journey with him, knowing it would shape the decisions he made moving forward. Change was coming, and Marcus intended to lead the charge, even if it meant standing alone against those unwilling to face the truth. Marcus Williams had endured countless indignities during his time undercover as a homeless man. He had been ignored, insulted, and even shoved aside by officers who failed to recognize him beneath his disguise. But nothing could have prepared him for the brutality he faced one fateful night, a confrontation that would leave both physical and emotional scars. It began innocently enough. Marcus was walking near a park known for its late-night drug activity, keeping an eye out for any suspicious behavior. Though disguised, he still carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority, which may have drawn unwanted attention. As he lingered near a dimly lit bench, a patrol car pulled up beside him. 3 officers stepped out, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like probing eyes. "What are you doing here?" one of them barked, his tone sharp and accusatory. Marcus hesitated, unsure how to respond without raising suspicion. "Just resting," he said quietly, lowering his gaze to appear submissive. The officer didn't seem satisfied. "Resting? Where? This is private property," another snapped, grabbing Marcus roughly by the arm. Before he could protest, they shoved him against the hood of the car, pinning him down while searching for identification. When Marcus admitted he didn't carry ID, the situation escalated quickly. One officer sneered, calling him derogatory, names laced with racial slurs. Another kicked at his legs, demanding answers about why he was loitering in the area. Marcus clenched his jaw, forcing himself to remain silent despite the rising anger bubbling inside him. His training screamed at him to fight back, to defend himself, but exposing his true identity now would ruin everything he had worked so hard to uncover. Instead, he endured each shove, each insult, filing away every moment as evidence waiting to be used later. The humiliation reached new heights when one officer leaned close, his breath hot with contempt. "You think you're better?" than us, don't you? He spat. Dressed like trash but acting all high and mighty. Let me tell you something. We see your kind every day and you're nothing. Absolutely nothing. Marcus stared straight ahead, refusing to meet the man's gaze. Inside, however, his heart pounded with a mix of fury and helplessness. Here he was, a decorated police chief, reduced to enduring such cruelty simply because of his appearance, and worse, because of the color of his skin. After what felt like an eternity, the officers finally relented, shoving Marcus onto the ground before driving off with mocking laughter echoing behind them. Bruised and shaken, Marcus lay there for several minutes, staring up at the starless sky. Tears welled in his eyes, not from pain, but from the sheer weight of what he had just experienced. It wasn't just the physical assault or the hateful words. It was the realization that these men, sworn to protect and serve, viewed people like him as less than human. And they weren't alone. Such attitudes permeated far too many corners of the department he led. That night, Marcus returned to the makeshift camp he shared with Sarah and a few others. Clutching his side where one of the officers had kicked him, he sank onto a piece of cardboard, trying to steady his breathing. Sarah noticed immediately that something was wrong. "Marcus, what happened?" she asked, her voice filled, real Nupener, no referer, with concern. At first, he tried to brush it off, muttering something about falling, but Sarah wasn't fooled. She knelt beside him, gently lifting his shirt to reveal angry red marks on his ribs. Her hands trembled as she examined the bruises. "Who did this to you?" she demanded, her eyes blazing with anger. Reluctantly, Marcus recounted the events of the night, leaving out only his true identity. Sarah listened intently, her expression shifting from shock to outrage. When he finished, she hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "This shouldn't happen to anyone. No one deserves this." For the first time since starting his undercover operation, Marcus allowed himself to cry. Not just for himself, but for everyone else who had suffered similar injustices. In that moment, he realized how much he needed allies like Sarah. People who understood the pain and frustration of being marginalized. Over the next few days, Marcus struggled to recover physically and emotionally. The bruises faded slowly, but the memories lingered, haunting him whenever he closed his eyes. Yet, instead of breaking him, the experience strengthened his resolve. He knew now more than ever that exposing the truth wasn't just important, it was essential. Every act of cruelty he endured reinforced the urgency of his mission. He couldn't let fear or fatigue derail him. Too much was at stake. To cope, Marcus threw himself into documenting every detail of the encounter. Using his hidden notebook, he wrote down everything he could remember. The officers' names, badge numbers, and exact words spoken during the altercation. He sketched rough maps of the park and noted the time of the incident. Each entry was precise, designed to leave no room for denial once he revealed his findings. Though painstaking work, the process gave Marcus a sense of control, transforming his suffering into something tangible and actionable. Sarah played a crucial role during this period, offering not just emotional support but practical assistance as well. She helped Marcus memorize key details, ensuring he wouldn't forget anything important. Together, they brainstormed ways to gather additional evidence, such as recording conversations or taking photographs discreetly. Their partnership became a beacon of hope in an otherwise bleak existence. Sarah often reminded Marcus why they were fighting, not just for themselves but for everyone who had ever been mistreated or dismissed because of prejudice. Despite the progress, doubts occasionally crept in. Late one night, as Marcus sat huddled under a tarp with Sarah, he voiced his fears aloud. "What if no one believes me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if they say I made it all up?" Sarah placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll make them believe," she replied firmly. "We have proof, Marcus. We have stories, names, dates. They can't ignore the truth forever." Her words bolstered his courage, pushing him to keep going even when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. Slowly but surely, Marcus pieced together a comprehensive record of misconduct within the department. Each entry added weight to his case, building a foundation upon which he could demand accountability. Still, he knew the hardest part lay ahead, returning to his role as police chief and confronting those responsible. As the weeks passed, Marcus grew increasingly restless. Though committed to seeing his mission through, he longed to shed his disguise and reclaim his authority. Yet he understood the importance of timing. Rushing back prematurely could jeopardize everything he had worked for. So he waited, biding his time until he felt confident he had gathered enough evidence to ensure justice prevailed. During this period, Marcus reflected deeply on the lessons he had learned. Life on the streets had stripped away layers of privilege, revealing raw truths about inequality and systemic bias. It had shown him the resilience of the human spirit and the power of solidarity in the face of adversity. Most importantly, it had reaffirmed his belief that leadership wasn't about wielding power over others, but using it to uplift those most vulnerable. Finally, after months of living undercover, Marcus decided the time had come to act. With Sarah's blessing, he prepared to return to headquarters, ready to unveil the truth he had uncovered. The thought of facing his subordinates again filled him with a mixture of dread and determination. He knew not everyone would welcome his revelations, and some might even resent him for exposing their actions. But Marcus refused to let fear dictate his choices. Justice demanded accountability, and he intended to deliver it, no matter the cost. On the morning of his return, Marcus stood before a cracked mirror in an abandoned building, shaving off his beard and trimming his hair. As he slipped into his familiar uniform, the transformation felt surreal. The man staring back at him was no longer the gaunt, weathered figure who had wandered the streets unnoticed. He was Chief Marcus Williams once more, strong, resolute, and unyielding in his pursuit of fairness. Taking a deep breath, he squared his shoulders and stepped outside, ready to face whatever challenges awaited him. Change was coming, and Marcus was determined to lead the charge, even if it meant standing alone against those unwilling to confront the truth. Returning to his role as police chief was both a relief and a daunting challenge for Marcus Williams. After months of living undercover as a homeless man, stepping back into the polished shoes of authority felt surreal. The weight of his uniform pressed heavily on his shoulders, not just physically but emotionally. He carried with him the stories, struggles, and injustices he had witnessed firsthand. Every badge number scribbled in his notebook, every bruise inflicted by officers who failed to recognize their own chief, and every act of neglect toward the vulnerable population burned vividly in his memory. Now, it was time to confront the rot within his department and hold those responsible accountable. Marcus's first day back at headquarters started quietly. He walked through the bustling station, nodding curtly at colleagues who greeted him warmly. Some noticed subtle changes in his demeanor, his jaw set tighter than usual, his eyes scanning the room with an intensity that made them uneasy. But no one suspected the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. That afternoon, Marcus called an emergency meeting, summoning all senior staff and key personnel to the conference room. The atmosphere grew tense as officers filed in, exchanging puzzled glances. What could be so urgent? When everyone was seated, Marcus stood at the head of the table, his posture commanding attention. Without preamble, he turned on a projector screen mounted on the wall. Grainy footage flickered to life, showing scenes captured during his undercover operation. There were clips of officers ignoring pleas for help, harassing homeless individuals, and using derogatory language laced with racial slurs. Gasps rippled through the room as faces became recognizable, names attached to uniforms that had once symbolized trust, now exposed as instruments of abuse. One clip showed an officer kicking over a makeshift tent, scattering belongings across the pavement while yelling insults. Another depicted a group of officers shoving a gaunt figure against a patrol car, the very same incident where Marcus himself had been brutalized. "This isn't entertainment," Marcus said sharply, cutting off murmurs of disbelief. "These are real people, human beings we swore to protect." And these are your actions." His voice hardened as he pointed to specific officers on the screen. "You know who you are. You've seen yourselves here today. This isn't about excuses or justifications, it's about accountability." The room erupted into chaos. Some officers tried to defend themselves, claiming they were stressed or misinterpreted. Others shifted blame onto systemic issues beyond their control. A few sat silently, guilt etched onto their faces. Marcus raised a hand, silencing the uproar. "I don't want to hear excuses," he declared firmly. "We took an oath to serve and protect. Not judge, not discriminate, not abuse our power. If you can't uphold that oath, then you don't belong in this department." As the initial shock wore off, resistance began to surface. Some officers accused Marcus of entrapment, arguing that his evidence was biased since it came from someone posing as homeless. Others questioned the legality of his methods, suggesting he had overstepped boundaries. But Marcus remained unshaken. He presented meticulously documented notes detailing dates, times, locations, and witnesses corroborating each incident. Sarah's accounts played a pivotal role, providing first-hand testimonies that aligned perfectly with his findings. By the end of the presentation, there was no denying the truth. Systemic racism and misconduct had taken root within the precinct, and it needed to be eradicated. The fallout was swift and severe. Over the next few weeks, internal investigations swept through the department like wildfire. Officers implicated in the videos faced disciplinary action ranging from suspension to termination, depending on the severity of their offenses. In some cases, criminal charges were filed. Community leaders praised Marcus for his courage, calling him a beacon of hope in turbulent times. Yet internally, tensions simmered. While many supported his efforts, others resented what they perceived as betrayal. Whispers circulated about favoritism and vengeance, painting Marcus as someone driven by personal vendettas rather than justice. Despite the backlash, Marcus refused to waver. He understood that true change required more than punishment. It demanded education, dialogue, and reform. To rebuild trust, he implemented mandatory sensitivity training programs designed to address implicit biases and foster empathy among officers. Role-playing exercises placed participants in scenarios inspired by real-life encounters, forcing them to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege and prejudice. Guest speakers, including former homeless individuals and civil rights activists, shared powerful stories that challenged preconceived notions and encouraged introspection. In addition to training, Marcus created forums for open communication between officers and marginalized communities. Town hall meetings brought together residents, business owners, and law enforcement officials to discuss concerns, share experiences, and collaborate on solutions. These sessions weren't always easy. Emotions ran high, and tempers flared when past grievances surfaced. But Marcus insisted on transparency, reminding everyone that progress often involved discomfort. Slowly but surely, bridges began forming where walls once stood. Sarah played an integral role in these initiatives, becoming a trusted advisor and advocate within the department. Her insights helped shape policies aimed at improving interactions with homeless populations, such as establishing designated outreach teams trained specifically to handle nonviolent crises. She also worked closely with social services to connect individuals with resources like housing assistance, healthcare, and job placement programs. Through her efforts, Marcus saw tangible results, not just in statistics, but in lives transformed. Yet, personal sacrifices accompanied professional victories. Relationships strained under the weight of Marcus's decisions. Old friends distanced themselves, wary of being associated with controversy. Even family members expressed concern, urging him to tread carefully lest he lose everything he had built. Nights grew lonely as doubts crept in, whispering questions about whether the fight was worth it. But Marcus found solace in small victories, a grateful smile from a woman reunited with her children, a teenager graduating rehab thanks to intervention, or simply knowing that fewer people feared encountering officers on the streets. One evening, as Marcus reviewed case files in his office, Sarah knocked gently on the doorframe. She entered holding 2 cups of coffee, setting one down before him. Thought you might need this, she said softly. Marcus smiled gratefully, taking a sip before leaning back in his chair. For a moment, neither spoke, content to share the quiet companionship forged through shared struggles. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her tone gentle yet probing. Marcus sighed, running a hand over his face. "It's complicated," he admitted. "Some days I feel like we're making progress. Other days it feels like nothing will ever change." He paused, staring into the depths of his coffee cup. "But then I remember why I started this, to give a voice to those who've been silenced for too long. And that keeps me going." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "You've already done so much, Marcus. Don't forget that. Change takes time, but you've planted seeds that will grow stronger with each passing day." Her words reassured him, reaffirming his belief in the importance of perseverance. Together, they discussed upcoming projects, a new initiative targeting youth engagement, plans to expand shelter capacities during winter months, and strategies for recruiting more diverse candidates into the force. As the conversation drew to a close, Sarah rose to leave, pausing briefly at the doorway. "Thank you," she said earnestly, "for everything you've done, for standing up when others stayed silent." Marcus watched her go, feeling a renewed sense of purpose wash over him. Though the road ahead remained fraught with challenges, he knew he wasn't walking it alone. Allies like Sarah reminded him that justice wasn't achieved single-handedly. It required collective effort, unwavering determination, and boundless compassion. Months later, as Marcus reflected on his journey, from undercover homelessness to leading sweeping reforms, he realized how profoundly the experience had changed him. Physically, he bore scars from nights spent on cold concrete and altercations with hostile officers. Emotionally, he carried memories of cruelty and kindness alike, each shaping his understanding of humanity's complexities. Professionally, he emerged stronger, more empathetic, and fiercely committed to dismantling systems of oppression wherever they existed. Though scars lingered, Marcus wore them proudly, knowing they symbolized progress born from sacrifice. Real strength, he had learned, lay not in wielding power but in using it wisely to uplift others, even if it meant bearing the weight of the world alone for a while. And as he gazed out at the city skyline, illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights, Marcus felt hopeful. Change was happening, one step, one policy, one heart at a time. The aftermath of Marcus Williams's revelations shook the police department to its core. While some officers embraced the changes, others resisted fiercely, creating a divide that threatened to tear the precinct apart. Tensions ran high as investigations continued and disciplinary actions unfolded. The atmosphere in the station was thick with unease. Whispers echoed in hallways, alliances shifted, and trust became a rare commodity. Yet, through it all, Marcus remained steadfast, determined to see his mission through to the end. One of the most challenging aspects of implementing reform was addressing resistance from within. Some veteran officers viewed Marcus's efforts as an attack on their legacy, accusing him of undermining decades of service with sweeping accusations. "You're throwing good cops under the bus for the sake of a few bad apples," one senior detective argued during a heated meeting. His words resonated with a faction of the department that felt unfairly targeted. They believed mistakes were inevitable in high-pressure jobs and shouldn't define entire careers. Marcus listened patiently before responding. "I'm not here to vilify anyone," he said calmly, "but I am here to ensure accountability. Yes, we have dedicated officers who work tirelessly to protect this city, but when misconduct goes unchecked, it tarnishes the badge for everyone, including you. If we want to regain public trust, we need to root out corruption wherever it exists." His response didn't satisfy everyone. Behind closed doors, resentment simmered. Anonymous notes appeared on Marcus's desk, warning him to back off or face consequences. A few officers requested transfers, claiming they couldn't work under such scrutiny. Others adopted passive-aggressive tactics, dragging their feet on assignments or openly questioning orders. It was clear that rebuilding unity wouldn't happen overnight. To counteract growing animosity, Marcus doubled down on transparency. He held weekly briefings where updates on internal investigations were shared openly, not just with staff, but also with community representatives invited to attend. These sessions aimed to demystify the process, showing that decisions were based on evidence rather than personal vendettas. By involving civilians, Marcus hoped to foster collaboration instead of division. Meanwhile, the sensitivity training programs he introduced began yielding results. Officers initially skeptical about participating found themselves challenged by scenarios designed to expose biases they hadn't realized they harbored. One exercise involved role-playing as homeless individuals seeking help. Participants had to navigate obstacles like hostile interactions with fictional officers, bureaucratic red tape, and societal stigma. Many left the session visibly moved, admitting they had never considered how daunting life could be for those without resources. Sarah played a critical role in these workshops, sharing her own experiences to humanize statistics and policies. Her story resonated deeply, reminding officers that homelessness wasn't a choice but often a result of circumstances beyond control. After one particularly emotional presentation, a young rookie approached her teary-eyed. "I didn't know," he confessed. "I thought people ended up on the streets because they didn't try hard enough. Hearing your story, it changes everything." Encouraged by moments like these, Marcus expanded outreach initiatives. He partnered with local shelters, churches, and nonprofits to create task forces focused on addressing systemic issues contributing to homelessness. Together, they launched campaigns raising awareness about affordable housing shortages, mental health crises, and addiction recovery programs. For the first time, law enforcement worked alongside social services instead of operating in isolation, a shift long overdue. Public perception started shifting too. News outlets covered Marcus's efforts extensively, portraying him as a leader willing to confront uncomfortable truths head-on. Community leaders praised his commitment to justice, organizing rallies in support of reform. Residents who once distrusted police began reporting crimes again, encouraged by visible improvements in officer behavior. Trust, though fragile, began to rebuild brick by brick. However, progress came at a cost. As allies rallied around Marcus, enemies grew bolder. Anonymous threats escalated into direct confrontations. One evening, as Marcus walked to his car after a late shift, a shadowy figure stepped into his path. "You think you can destroy us?" the man growled, his voice low and menacing. Marcus recognized him immediately, an officer recently suspended following an investigation. Before the situation could escalate further, backup arrived, alerted by surveillance cameras monitoring the parking lot. Though shaken, Marcus refused to press charges, choosing instead to focus on larger battles ahead. Privately, however, the toll weighed heavily. Nights spent poring over case files left little room for rest. Days stretched endlessly, filled with meetings, interviews, and strategizing. Friends and family noticed the strain etched onto his face, urging him to take breaks. "You're only human, Marcus," his sister reminded him during a rare visit. "Even superheroes need time to recharge." Her words struck a chord. Realizing he couldn't sustain this pace indefinitely, Marcus delegated tasks to trusted colleagues, empowering them to lead specific initiatives. This decision proved pivotal. Not only did it alleviate pressure on him, but also fostered ownership among team members invested in seeing change succeed. Slowly, momentum built as more officers embraced reform not as punishment, but as opportunity. Amidst professional challenges, Marcus cherished moments of triumph. When a formerly homeless man secured stable employment thanks to outreach efforts, Marcus attended the celebration hosted by Sarah and her network. Seeing pride radiate from the man's eyes reinforced why every sleepless night, every confrontation, every sacrifice mattered. Change wasn't abstract. It was tangible, breathing life into broken systems and restoring dignity to forgotten souls. By year's end, significant strides had been made. Internal investigations concluded with accountability measures implemented across the board. New hires reflected increased diversity, bringing fresh perspectives into the force. Policies prioritizing de-escalation over aggression, reduced violent encounters dramatically. Most importantly, public confidence soared, evident in rising approval ratings and declining complaints. Yet Marcus knew the journey wasn't over. Reforms required constant vigilance. Complacency risked undoing hard-won gains. Reflecting on lessons learned, he penned a letter addressed to future generations of officers, a testament to perseverance, empathy, and integrity. In it, he wrote, "True strength lies not in wielding power, but in using it wisely. Leadership means standing, firm when others falter, speaking truth when silence prevails, and serving selflessly even when unrecognized. Remember, our duty is not merely to enforce laws, but to embody justice itself." As he sealed the envelope, Marcus allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. Life on the streets had humbled him, exposing raw truths about inequality and resilience. Returning to power had tested his resolve, pushing him to confront both external opposition and internal doubts. But through it all, one thing remained certain: real change demanded courage, and Marcus had proven himself fearless. Looking out at the city skyline bathed in twilight hues, Marcus felt hopeful. Shadows still lingered, remnants of battles fought, and won. But light pierced through cracks, illuminating paths forward. Justice wasn't perfect, nor was it final. It evolved, shaped by those willing to fight for fairness despite odds stacked against them. And Marcus Williams stood ready, prepared to lead the charge for as long as necessary. Months turned into years, and Chief Marcus Williams' efforts began to bear fruit in ways he had once only dreamed of. The reforms he implemented weren't perfect, but they marked a turning point for the department and for the city itself. Slowly, trust between law enforcement and marginalized communities started to rebuild. Officers no longer approached homeless individuals with disdain. Instead, they engaged with empathy, understanding that their circumstances didn't define their worth. The streets, once filled with tension and fear, now echoed laughter and conversation as people dared to believe again in the possibility of fairness. For Marcus, the journey had been grueling, a marathon rather than a sprint. But every step forward felt like vindication. He often reflected on his time under cover, remembering the hunger, the cold nights, and the humiliation he endured. Those experiences had left scars, both visible and invisible, but they also shaped him into a leader who understood suffering firsthand. His sacrifices gave weight to his words, making them impossible to dismiss when he spoke about systemic injustice or advocated for change. One evening, as Marcus sat in his office sipping coffee, Sarah walked in unannounced. She looked different from the woman he had met on the streets years ago, cleaner, healthier, her eyes brighter with hope. "You busy?" she asked with a smile. Marcus shook his head, gesturing for her to sit. Over the next hour, they reminisced about everything they had been through together, the hardships, the victories, the moments of doubt that eventually led to triumph. Sarah shared updates about her life. She had secured permanent housing, enrolled in community college, and even started volunteering at a local shelter. "None of this would have happened without you," she said earnestly. Marcus waved off the compliment. "Don't give me too much credit," he replied. "You did the hard work. I just helped clear the way." But Sarah wasn't having it. "No, Marcus, you risked everything for strangers, for people society had forgotten. That takes courage, and because of you, so many lives have changed, including mine." Her words stayed with him long after she left. It wasn't the first time someone had thanked him for his efforts, but hearing it from Sarah carried special significance. She represented not just an individual transformed by reform, but a symbol of what was possible when compassion replaced prejudice. Her success reminded Marcus why he had chosen this path in the first place: to serve and protect, not judge and discriminate. As the months passed, Marcus continued refining policies to address lingering issues. Homelessness remained a challenge, exacerbated by rising living costs and inadequate social services. To combat this, Marcus partnered with city officials to allocate funds toward affordable housing projects and expand access to mental health resources. He also introduced programs pairing officers with social workers during outreach missions, ensuring vulnerable populations received holistic support rather than temporary fixes. The changes extended beyond policy. Within the department, a culture shift took hold. Young recruits entered the force inspired by Marcus's example, eager to uphold values of integrity and fairness. Veterans who initially resisted reform gradually came around, realizing that accountability strengthened rather than weakened their mission. Community policing initiatives thrived, fostering relationships built on mutual respect rather than suspicion. Neighborhoods once plagued by crime saw reductions in violence as residents collaborated with officers to create safer environments. Still, challenges persisted. Resistance from entrenched interests occasionally resurfaced, reminding Marcus that progress was never linear. Anonymous complaints trickled in, accusing him of favoritism or overreach. Some media outlets painted his reforms as divisive, pitting good cops against bad ones. Yet, Marcus refused to be deterred. He knew criticism came with leadership, especially when tackling deeply rooted problems. What mattered most was staying true to his principles and trusting that time would prove his methods effective. On the 5th anniversary of his return to power, Marcus organized a ceremony honoring those who had contributed to the department's transformation. Officers, community leaders, volunteers, and formerly homeless individuals gathered in the precinct's courtyard, sharing stories of resilience and gratitude. As Marcus stood before the crowd, microphone in hand, he felt overwhelmed by emotion. "When I first decided to go undercover," he began, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat, "I didn't know what I'd find, or how far the rot of prejudice extended within our ranks. What I discovered broke my heart, but it also fueled my resolve. I realized that real justice isn't about punishing wrongdoers. It's about creating systems where wrongs can't take root in the first place." He paused, scanning faces illuminated by soft lantern light. "Today we celebrate progress, not perfection. We've made mistakes along the way, stumbled, fallen, but we've also risen stronger each time, because we chose to listen, to learn, to grow. Together, we've shown that change is possible, even when it feels impossible." Applause erupted, followed by cheers and whistles. Tears glistened in some eyes, while others nodded solemnly, acknowledging the truth in Marcus's words. Rinkiu. The attendees was Sarah, clapping enthusiastically alongside her daughter, who now attended school regularly thanks to stability provided by supportive programs. Nearby stood Jake, the former construction worker, now employed full-time at a nonprofit helping others find jobs. Each face told a story of redemption, resilience, and renewal. After the ceremony, Marcus lingered behind, watching as guests mingled under twinkling string lights. A young officer approached him hesitantly, holding out a folded piece of paper. "Chief, I wanted to say thank you," the rookie stammered. "Your reforms saved my career before it even started. Before coming here, I thought policing was all about authority. Now I see it's about service and humanity." Marcus accepted the note graciously, unfolding it later in private. Inside, written in neat handwriting, were 3 simple words: "We believe in you." They brought tears to his eyes, affirming that his sacrifices hadn't been in vain. Real strength lay not in wielding power, but in using it wisely, and Marcus had done exactly that. Years later, retired and reflecting on his legacy, Marcus visited the park where he had spent countless nights as a homeless man. Trees swayed gently in the breeze, casting dappled shadows across well-maintained pathways. Benches bore plaques commemorating donors who supported revitalization efforts, a stark contrast to the neglected space he remembered. Children laughed nearby, playing tag beneath watchful parents' gazes. Peace reigned, an outcome Marcus had fought tirelessly to achieve. Though physically removed from active duty, Marcus remained involved in advocacy work, mentoring aspiring leaders and speaking at conferences about overcoming systemic bias. His story became a beacon of hope for others facing similar battles, proving that courage coupled with compassion could dismantle even the strongest fortresses of injustice. In Dao Yi, The end, Marcus understood that leadership wasn't measured by accolades or promotions but by impact. By enduring humiliation and pain, he exposed flaws others chose to ignore, paving the way for equity and accountability. The scars he carried served as reminders, not of defeat, but of perseverance. And though silence might have been easier, Marcus chose action, knowing that history favored those bold enough to stand up for what was right. As he walked away from the park that day, sunlight warming his face, Marcus smiled softly. The road ahead still held uncertainties, but one thing was certain. Justice demanded vigilance, and Marcus Williams had proven himself fearless. For as long as breath filled his lungs, he vowed to continue leading the charge, inspiring others to follow suit. After all, true heroes weren't defined by capes or titles. They were defined by actions. And Marcus's actions spoke louder than words ever could.